Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is actor, writer, and musician Paul Spence, known to many as Dean Murdock from FUBAR. The FUBAR universe spawned 2 films, a TV series, and a book. Now Spence is back with an origin story of Dean that is unrelated to the FUBAR franchise, called givin'r '89. Paul, thanks so much for doing the show this week.
Oh, hi, Dennis. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure, and it's an honor to be here on the other side of Face to Face here. I've seen quite a few episodes, so yeah, it's kind of fun to be on the show myself.
Well, happy to hear that. I didn't want to say this when we were talking off screen, but this is a dream come true for me. I was in year 1 of college when FUBAR came out. No doubt have watched it hundreds of times since then. Unbeknownst to you, put down a few hundred pillies with you as well, but just a real big fan, so thanks for doing the show.
Wow, yeah, well, no, again, thanks for having me in, and that's, yeah, it's funny you didn't tell me that, but good to know.
But we're going to start with something totally unrelated to FUBAR, and that is givin'r '89. Can you give us a little rundown about the film?
Sure, yeah. I mean, a couple years ago, I sold the rights to, my rights to FUBAR, the brand and all that stuff. But as I created the character Dean, so I could still do what I wanted with the character, and had always been kind of kicking around some ideas of did I want to do like a TV show, and I had a few pitches kind of going out there. But then finally settled on what I thought would be the most fun thing to do would be to go back and experience what it was like for Dean to become the headbanger that sort of we see in the present day. Where'd the fanny pack come from? Like, who showed him how to shotgun a beer? Did he always love metal, or what was he before metal came into his life? Because me as a personal, like my actual self, I was kind of one way. I was kind of a jock, and I was into, like improvisation and stuff. And then I kind of got into music, and I sort of veered away from those things, and music kind of took over. So I was curious to explore that with givin'r. And then the more I sort of thought about it, the more I got into it, the more jokes there were, and the more sort of funny stuff there was to it. But the one thing that was missing was this kind of the storyline. Like, well, what's the actual story? It's not just that he discovers music. That seemed kind of boring. And it was around that same time that my dad and I were sort of investigating our own history, which was my dad had Métis heritage. At the time, he didn't really know really at all what his background was. He had always been told, George, you're not an Indian by his parents. And then it came to light that, in fact, not only was his mother Métis, but his father as well. So it kind of opened up this whole world of what it was like to grow up just not knowing what your identity was, to have it hidden from you. He grew up in northern Saskatchewan in Prince Albert, which, at the time in the 1950s and 60s, can only assume by all the stories that were told, was not necessarily a friendly place to grow up if you were Indigenous. And so I could understand why his parents tried to, make him white passing, he and his 3 sisters. And so the exploration of that experience of him, and finding out that actually his great-grandfather, Andrew Spence, was one of the guys who was the head of the Métis Alliance at the time, the regroupment of the Scottish, English Métis, and the French Métis. He was the one who helped sign a letter to send it with Gabriel Dumont down to I believe it was North Dakota, where Louis Riel was at the time, and they convinced him to come back to help them with their land claims disputes with the federal government. So the fact that we had this actual contact, you know what I mean, like a direct genealogical connection with the Métis people, that went right back to the origins of our people in Winnipeg. It was really interesting because at first, there's like an identity question of like, who are you, and can you call yourself that if you never were your whole life, or you don't really have a place to stay or call your own. And so that was like the question that I wanted to ask as part of the film, and I sort of wove that into the storyline. And I'd like to think at the very least it kind of highlights that it's not something that's just in the past, you know, that this is a storyline that affects people that are among us today, including me and my father and like thousands and thousands of others in Canada too. So I tried to make a really funny movie that also had kind of an interesting storyline, and I mean, I'd like to think it was kind of a success, hopefully. I mean, people will be able to judge for themselves.
What's been the reaction to the film so far?
Well, yeah. I didn't want to toot my own horn, but you know, we throughout the promotion of the film, we went across Canada from Halifax all the way to Vancouver, and it was really interesting. I mean, particularly like the audience who watches this show. You know, Edmonton and Winnipeg, very large contingent of the audience members were Indigenous, and it was really cool to hear them laughing at the references and the jokes that I made, you know, that were sort of like, you know, Indigenous sort of leaning kind of jokes and stuff. To really hear it, and then afterwards, just, you know, people coming up to me and just saying that it was really cool and unique to see a Métis sort of origin story being told, because there just aren't very many of them. You know, I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to even just the word, like what is a Métis, and you know, like it's in the courts, and you know, like what is it and how far does it go and how far back and all that's, and you know, the Métis that I speak to is, you know, would be like the Manitoba Métis Federation, where, you know, it's like from the Red River Valley, where, you know, my ancestry, where we started, you know. And then when it came to like these sort of like the Métis script and the land claims disputes and stuff, and the government pushing everybody out, they all went to northern Saskatchewan, or at least my dad's family did. And so it's just really interesting to meet people after screenings, and they're like, "Oh man, that was so funny," and they're like, "Yeah, I'm from Prince Albert too," you know what I mean? And they're just sort of like to have those connections that, in my mind when I was writing the script, I was so hopeful that it would be that, you know what I mean? That it would be something that kind of brings people together and shines a little bit of a light on what it was like, and you know, Métis culture itself. And to have people come up after the film and say that they laughed their asses off and they had a great time, but also it was fun to see that storyline. That was the best part, honestly, because that was really the idea from the very beginning.
What was it like? You know, I think a lot of particularly Métis and white passing Indigenous people that find out about their history and family later in life. What was that like for you and your father to be able to go through that experience together?
Yeah, you know, I mean, to be perfectly honest, at first it was upsetting for my dad. We went to Batoche this past summer, and you know, his initial reaction to reading the, you know, like they have all these signs out there and explaining what happened and the history of it, all that, and then you go inside and you see the costumes and stuff and the recreations that they have of the Battle of Batoche. And, you know, my dad's initial instinct was just he was really upset, because it sort of became very real how poorly treated the Métis people were back in those days. You know, the Métis script where you were given $160 or 160 acres of land that was in the middle of nowhere, possibly swampland that you couldn't even get to without like uprooting your entire family. It was really destined. You know, the whole idea of the Métis script at the time was to just disassociate those people from the Indigenous sort of larger culture, and to spread them out and to end basically the people themselves. I mean, it's really hard not to see it that way. And they were encouraged, or discouraged rather, from farming, which is something that they'd been doing for 100 years, something that they'd gotten very good at in the prairies. So my dad sort of saw all that, and he was just kind of upset about it at first. And subsequent to that, he's kind of understood that that's part of it. You know what I mean? To understanding where you come from, and to be able to identify with it, and to find a sense of pride also with who the people were and the struggles that they went through, and also just that they were able to leave their homeland, which was in Manitoba, and then find themselves and restart their whole lives with a couple of cows, an oxen, a cart, like their entire world on their shoulders and in their carts. But they set back up in Saskatchewan and found relative success over there. So it's finding the positivity, I guess, in these situations, and being proud of of the people that you come from. And so ultimately it's been a very positive thing, and since then the Manitoba Métis Federation who has reached out to me, and they were sort of encouraging me to officially become part of their nation, because that's where our family is from. It's just been overwhelming, the sort of like the positivity and the welcoming that has come since the film came out. So, you know, my dad he's happy now. You know, he's excited. He's like, so when's that application going? You know, he's just like, he called himself a California Cree his entire life. Like, he just invented out of whole cloth this definition for himself, because he was embarrassed and didn't know what to say, because he clearly looked indigenous. His nickname was Big, you know, and I didn't find out until later that meant Big Indian George, you know. Like, that was his nickname throughout his whole high school and elementary school and stuff. And so to finally have him, you know, come around and be able to be kind of proud of it, and kind of, you know, just kind of, yeah, being able to understand that it's okay to talk about it and have a story to tell his friends, it's been really, really edifying and surprising in so many ways. So it's been a really, really great journey in that sense, for sure.
Paul, awesome story. Much more to talk about here, Paul. We just have to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here with Paul Spence. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Paul Spence, and we've been talking about his latest film, Dean '89. And Dean, you know, there's Paul. There's some of the biggest names in Canadian comedy in this film. Some real royalty. What was it like working with the likes of, you know, Will Sasso, Mary Walsh, this type of royalty in the Canadian comedy scene?
Yeah, I mean, can't not mention Kevin McDonald from the Kids in the Hall also. I mean, I'll start with Kevin, just because Kids in the Hall was my entry point into not only comedy, but being aware that Canadians could be successful making comedy, right? Mm-hmm. The Kids in the Hall were the biggest show on television in my world. You know, like Saturday Night Live was on, and, you know, Eddie Murphy doing his thing, the hot tub and stuff, but Kids in the Hall was on all the time. It was just like, it was constantly showing on CBC at the time. And then they went up to, was it NBC or ABC? They got the sort of like the bump to the American network. It was so you're just laughing all the time. You're going to school the next day, you're on the bus, you're meeting people in the schoolyard, and you're just like, oh man, did you see that scene? You know, like, I'm crushing you or whatever. Like, how much would my head weigh if it was with cheese? Like, just the most absurdist humor, but that like really spoke to me as like, okay, yeah, that's funny stuff. But they were all Canadian, you know what I mean? And they just looked like us, and they felt like us, and it seemed so doable. So to have to be able to have Kevin McDonald on the same film as that I was in, that I wrote, it was just amazing. It was really cool, and he was so funny. You know, just like everything spilling out of his mouth as we're driving towards the set, it's just making me laugh. And so yeah, just Kevin is such a gem. And that was amazing. And Mary Walsh, I mean, again, there's not a ton of improvisation in the film. We kept it pretty rigid to the script, but Mary's improvisations, if you're from the East Coast, you'll just know immediately, like, oh yeah, that's Mary being Mary. She's just so unique and genuine, and such a funny, great person. It was really a challenge when I was writing the character of Dean's mentor. I wanted it to be a woman, because in my life, a lot of the people who were like influential, from music to just like who I was as a person, were women. You know, like my mom and my older sister. I had a really good like a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, at school, in high school, that was just constant source of hilarity and like, you know, learning about myself and the world around me. And so I wanted it to be a woman, but then when we were casting, it was like, who the heck can play that seminal role of like Dean's badass, but also cool, funny, and hilarious sort of like mentor? And then Mary, like, she came out of the blue and was like, yes, it was perfect. So shout out to Mary and everyone else on the East Coast. And then Will Sasso, of course. It's kind of funny because someone randomly tagged me in an Instagram post with, I believe it was my body with Will Sasso's face. He was kind of crunching it up like he does, sort of like make him like he's like 1,000 neck folds, and his face looks really ridiculous. And so I hit him up. I just said, "Oh, that's kind of funny." And then we became Instagram friends, where we would, you know, direct message each other every once in a while. And out of the blue, I just said, "Hey, I've got a film coming up, and you would be great to be in the role of the dad." I don't know, just throwing it out there. Within maybe a couple hours, he writes back, "Yeah, I'm in. Just let me figure it out with my people." And I thought, okay, now it's never going to happen, because he's got a manager, an agent. He's like, you know, leads a very successful and busy life in Hollywood. And we worked it out. You know, he's in the movie, and he's got to be one of the funniest people I've ever met. You know, he's just a gregarious, big guy. And the second he starts talking, I got like a glimmer of a smile on my lips. So to have them all three of those huge, it's amazing. So I can't get over it. Every time I sort of watch the movie, I can't get over all these like heavy hitters from the Canadian comedy scene that are in our film. You know, it blows my mind.
I'm sure it does. You know, 20 plus years later, Paul, what do you think it is about the Dean character that still hits home with people, that it's endured for so many years?
You know, I do think about that a lot, and especially when we were on the tour and people were just like huge crowds of people kind of coming up and waiting in line just to meet the Deaner and just to, you know, shake his hand, my hand, you know, we're a bit one and the same, I guess, and just to say hi. It does make me think about what it is about Dean that you know that really that resonates with people. And I don't know, one of the things I think is just that he's like a nice guy. You know, he's simple, he's funny, and he has this sort of like doesn't give a crap kind of attitude. I think that people, you know, they like the idea of living vicariously through someone else. And so they see Dean up there doing things that they maybe wouldn't do, but they used to do when they were younger, or they always wanted to do but didn't have the courage to do. Like, oh, he's in a band even though he sucks. You know, he's still playing in a band. You know what I mean? Like stuff like that most people are like, well, I can't play an instrument or sing, so I guess I'm not ever going to be a band. For Dean, that's like, don't worry about that. Just do it. You know, and the vicarious like ridiculousness that is Dean, just kind of saying whatever comes out of the top of his head. I think people love that stuff, and everyone feels like, oh, Dean's my favorite uncle, or he's like the cousin, or he's like, you know what I mean? Like he's that guy that people have in their lives that when they get older, you know, you move away from those people, or you're just like, you know, life just tends to lead you into a bit more domestic direction because you have kids or whatever. But then the Deaner character is this like unique sort of unicorn where he never ages in one sense. He's always kind of like the same age. He's always fun. He's always ready to give her. You know, he's out to go. He's got a beer in hand. He's ready to hand you a smoke. You know what I mean? Like that kind of guy. And I think that's just, people like to romanticize that idea, even though they maybe aren't like that anymore. They never were. The Deaner always is, you know, so they can kind of rely on him to be like a good time party leader.
For sure, that's a for sure. Did you expect that it was going to blow up like that? And what was the impact of that? Yeah, you know, getting into a film festival like Sundance is just, it's something that it happened to us when we were in our early 20s, and you just kind of assume that it's going to keep happening, you know, and it never did again, you know, and who's to say, maybe it might in the future, but it really was the most unique and crazy thing that can happen to someone who, you know, I had just graduated university. I was, you know, working as a writer, you know, doing copy editing and stuff, not really what I had wanted to do. And then, you know, get the call out of the blue from an old friend to come back to Calgary. I was in Montreal at the time. And we were just like shooting on a camera, like, you know, a Canon camera this big, and we didn't think that anything was going to happen with it. So everything that's happened subsequent to that is just like a blessing. You know, I can't think of like a day doesn't go by where I don't feel just so fortunate that that we managed to pull that off, that all the like things kind of rolled the right way. And that I managed to have a career in the film and television industry, in large part due to that. You know, I mean, maybe my writing career would have gone in a different direction, but certainly the way that it did go is that, you know, I've written scripts, and you know, I wrote a script for Dean '89. You know what I mean? A fully scripted feature film comedy that came out across Canada, you know, in theaters across the country. It just blows my mind, and I never stop being, you know, appreciative of my good fortune, and trying to help others, you know, who are coming up, like younger filmmakers and stuff,
whatever. If it's like a couple hours of reading someone's script or just giving someone a bit of advice, just try and be a bit of a support mechanism for those who are on their way up. You know what I mean? Who might be the next Deaner.
Paul, awesome story. Much more to talk about here, Paul. We just have to step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here with Paul Spence. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Paul Spence, whose latest film, Dean 89, has in theaters right now. Going to be streaming, I understand, in December. Paul, are there more Deaner stories to be told?
Oh, that's a great question. People have been asking me that. What's the next thing? And as far as like a next Deaner feature film, that I am not entirely sure of, because I don't know what I could do to really ramp it up. Like going back to 1989, like when rock was still king. Yeah. I think that was really kind of like the high watermark of where you wanted to see Dean. But there's other things like if you were to really ramp it up, you could do something like Aliens meets Deaner or Predator meets Deaner. That's the kind of thing that I could see you really ramp it up to the next level where you take it to Hollywood. You know what I mean? Deaner versus the Titanic, or something like that. Where it's just completely out of this world, and you're like, what is going on? You know what I mean? Like instead of trying to recreate where the worlds that Dean has been in before, you just take it to a completely different level. That I think I might investigate, but I haven't. No one's been calling with an $80 million sort of superhero movie budget yet, but you never know. If you guys are out there, give me a dingle.
We need Deaner in space to be made. What are some of the... what is it, like Star Trek Deaner Chronicles or something like that. A full series for sure. Just before we go, Paul, you mentioned music, and people who watch the movies might think Deaner doesn't really know how to play music or anything like that. But your music is actually in all of the films. Can you talk a little bit here before we go just on the importance of music for yourself?
Well, okay, I would say that when it comes to music, and it's a great question, the importance of music for me is collaboration. And that's something that I really learned I would recommend anybody, no matter how old you are, but definitely if you're a younger person, to just start a band, because it's the best way to learn how to work together with other people, and to understand that the sum of the parts is much greater and better than the parts itself. Just because, like, when we made the music throughout this whole process of all the films and TV that I've ever made, you get in the studio with the band and you're like, okay, this is the idea, and you have something in your head, and then what comes out the other end when you've worked it through with like 3, 4, 5 other guys with a producer and stuff that you trust, it's so different and so much better. You know what I mean? Like the Nightseeker album that we did, 3069, a space rock sex odyssey. I have a hard time saying it with a straight face. That album is so awesome. Like, I'm so proud of it. And it's nothing like I had in my head. It's because it was a collaborative effort. And the same goes with the soundtrack for Dean 89. We had a couple weeks in the studio, had a couple ideas bouncing around, and then we just had so much fun. We got this guy in the keyboard, Stan Keyboardski, came in from Edmonton. We're like, yeah, maybe something kind of 80s, something like, imagine you're riding a BMX and he's like, boop, boop, beep, 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 boop, beep, and it was just perfect, you know what I mean? And we're just laughing, having a great time, because like making a movie is so stressful, because every day you've got 8 hours or 12 hours, you got to hit all these marks. Whereas with music, it's kind of like, well, we're just going to roll until like 1 o'clock. Oh, it's going really good. Let's go till 2 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like the dynamic is very, very different. So while movie making is very like satisfying, and at the end of it, you've got this film and it's amazing, it's very stressful. Whereas making music is a lot more fun. So the music part of it is it's a huge part for me, not only because I love the end result, but the process itself too is really, really gratifying. And you just become like, I've made so many friends in the music industry that are like lifelong best pals, which is really, really cool too.
Paul, we're way over time here, unfortunately, but yeah, anybody watching, you can watch and listen to the podcast or go to YouTube for the whole thing. But Paul, just real great to have you on the show, and hope that we'll get to meet in real life sometime and GIVI'r here in Winnipeg, and all the best with the film and everything coming up for you.
Thank you so much, and yeah, good luck with the show. I'm a big fan, so thanks for having me on one more time.
That is all the time we do have for this week's episode. You can always catch up on any episodes you may have missed by visiting our website or going to the APTN News YouTube page. This episode and all of our previous episodes are also available as podcasts, and you can find those wherever you download your podcasts. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks so much for tuning in this week. We'll see you back here in 7 days.